We're back.
We are already.
Imagine the week flew.
Didn't it just?
Today, what will we cover, Helen?
Well, today we're going to talk about boundaries.
Oh.
Because we're not always very good at establishing our personal boundaries. And I think particularly at the moment when work and life were distinctly separate, it's easier. You might be better at setting them in one area than another. But the last year has meant that those boundaries have blurred so much for so many people that I think it's just a really important thing to talk about.
Yeah, cool. And also ahead of maybe people going into different ways of working going forward, because it's a good chance to start a new habit when you start back into doing something for the first time. So I guess if you are struggling with a boundary or setting some boundaries, then working towards establishing firmer ones when you get back to work or whatever the arrangement's going to be can help too.
Because I think there's probably quite a lot of people who maybe have been on furlough or have been working from home who came out of environments where they didn't feel they were very good at setting those boundaries and were being taken advantage of. And even working from home, somebody said to me the other day that what was great about working from home was you got 2 hours extra work a day. I did just look at them and go, sorry. And it's that, they need to sit down, they need to watch this. And it's that, isn't it? It's if they're thinking that, how are so many employers thinking about the productivity levels that people have been achieving at home? And how can you start to get the confidence to go back with those boundaries in place and then articulate those to your organization?
Yeah, but presumably at some point, I mean, if you talk about 2 extra hours a day, 5 days a week, that's 10 hours a week. That's 40 hours a month. I mean, that's a whole working week. So you're working 5 weeks in a month instead of your 4. That's not sustainable either, is it?
It probably feels it at the moment because if you were doing that commute anyway, and because you're not having to do that, the commute takes a massive physical and emotional toll on you anyway, especially if you're going into, traveling on public transport or if you're sat in a massive traffic jam every day. So having been relieved of that pressure, the ability to actually get more work done in an environment and in timescales that work for you probably does feel like a bit of a relief. But you've upped the expectation of how much you can do in a working week, because like you say, you've added an extra 10 hours a week. So you can tell you're the accountant, I had to think about that. An extra hours. And that's going to make a significant difference to what you achieve every week.
Yeah, but I agree, commutes. I mean, I hated commuting and I always tried to live within 20 minutes walk of where I worked. But a lot of people listen to podcasts, for example, or read the newspaper or read a book, and they were boundaries in a way that was my space. Yeah, okay, I'm commuting and maybe I don't like it, but I'm doing something for myself. Yeah. And that takes its toll when it disappears.
Yeah, I remember when I used to work, and I used to do days in London occasionally, and the going on the train, the sort of 45 minutes to an hour on the train on the way in was my time to go from being mum to get my head in the right place to go in and deliver a day's training. And then coming back was the decompression, the getting rid of that. And so that I could walk back in the house. It might be 7 o'clock at night, but walk back in the house as mum rather than this stressed executive. Not that I was ever an executive, but that sense of back to who I was when I left the house. And I think a lot of people have found that decompression time, you're absolutely right, the decompression time has gone. I think back at, if I think back to this time last year, and when the weather started to get really, really nice last year, and loads of people were on furlough, and what was so lovely was when I used to walk the dog between sort of 4:30, 5:00, the amount of families out on the nature reserve near where I live, and there were loads, you could see these parents, these dads that, in the main, without being sexist, but, who I'd never ever seen before because they'd been on a train or in a car. And they really embrace that ability to spend that time with their family. But I think over time, that's crept, and probably because the season, time of year, the weather, what have you, be interesting to see if that's the same, if people are still working from home as this spring and summer develop. Do we see the same number of people taking advantage of being able to do that as did last year?
And I think the other thing that's an interesting point, but the other point you made, I suppose, is almost like physical boundaries. So your office it's easier to imagine I walk through a door of one building.
Yeah.
I get on a train or a bike or a bus or walk, and I walk in the door of my home, then there's a separation, isn't there? But one of the things I did was, and I haven't done this like all the time, but one of the things I did for myself was I would put a reminder in my calendar at my closing time, my end of day, to do yoga or go for a walk, whichever, sometimes it was both. But it was, and once I did one of those things, you flip. So again, there was almost like I created a physical boundary, because that's the thing about boundaries. They're invisible.